The rain hadn't started yet, but the skies over Washington hung heavy, like the breath of a nation holding in a scream. Outside the Capitol, reporters jostled for angles, their cameras snapping like distant gunfire. Protesters murmured behind. Barricades, their chants faint but relentless. Inside the hearing room, beneath blistering fluorescent lights, sat Letitia James. Chin high, lips pressed tight, a woman rehearsing poise while her world quietly trembled. The air in the chamber was thick, not with dust, but with consequence. Every seat was taken. The press gallery was stacked shoulder to shoulder, a zoo of lenses and pens. Aides whispered in corners. The gallery buzzed like a swarm of locusts before a storm. At the centre of it all, Letitia remained motionless. The sheer hard leather of her chair, a throne and a trap. Her tailored jacket couldn't hide the tension etched into her spine. Her eyes didn't wander. They couldn't. Not today. The voice came not from the room, but from the conscience of the story itself, like a ghost lingering in the rafters. Before the subpoenas, the headlines and the downfall, there was just a promise. One that would shatter everything. Then it happened. Jim Jordan entered like a shadow with a heartbeat, unapologetically tireless, folder in hand, eyes fixed like a man holding a verdict instead of a briefing. He didn't acknowledge the cameras. He didn't need to. Pam Bondi followed a half step behind him. Precise, elegant, radiating the kind of control that made people lean in rather than step back. Together, they moved like an axis, spinning gravity toward the table. Without drama, without warning, Jordan dropped the folder. A soft thud, but it rang louder than any gavel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Letitia James knew, he said, his tone steady and lethal. She planned this. Before the evidence, before the oath. The room fell into a silence so dense, even the hum of the AC seemed to recede. Cameras zoomed in as Letitia's fingers twitched ever so slightly. She didn't blink, but her right eye betrayed her. A flicker, a twitch, too quick to be denial, too late to be control. A single bead of sweat traced her temple, catching a flashbulb like a diamond under pressure. This wasn't legal theatre. It was reckoning. She stared at the folder like it held not papers, but bones. Evidence long buried now, clawing back to the surface. Secrets she never thought would breathe daylight. Again, Pam Bondi didn't speak. She simply stood at Jordan's flank like a sword still sheathed but ready. Her presence said everything. This wasn't a hearing. This was a trial with no plea deal. Letitia inhaled through her nose, slow and subtle. It wasn't fear. It was calculation, but calculation, when cornered, looks a lot like desperation. Outside, a thunderclap echoed like applause from the heavens, or a warning. And in that moment, one question pierced through the marble walls and murmured in every ear, watching, listening, waiting. What happens when justice is no longer blind, but personal? If this truth shook you, imagine what the next secret might uncover. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe, because the real story has only just begun. The folder hadn't even been opened, yet Letitia's chest burned like it already had. Her spine stayed straight, chin level, but beneath that hard shell was a tempest. Shame wrapped in fury. Not at them, at herself. She knew this moment would come. She just didn't expect it to happen this soon, or this loudly. Letitia James hadn't always been the woman in the hot seat. Once she was a rising star, celebrated, envied, untouchable. New York's legal crusader, a daughter of Brooklyn with a steel tongue and a halo of headlines. They called her a warrior. But inside, she wore her ambition like a mask sewn from glass. Reflective and fragile, every public victory concealed private doubt. She questioned herself more than she'd ever admit. Was she smart enough? Respected enough? History would forget the careful. It remembered the bold. So one night, alone with a glass of wine and a bitter news report, she made a promise not to justice, but to vengeance. He will fall, she whispered. And she meant it. Not because he broke the law, she hadn't even seen the files, but because he embarrassed people like her. Loud, crass, powerful men who made careers stepping on the backs of principled women. She wouldn't let him do it again. Not on her watch, but a mission of justice turned personal is a fire that eats through its own foundation. As her office ballooned with investigators, whispers began. A junior staffer noticed case files being pulled from storage with no context. Another found evidence already redacted before a single subpoena was issued. One aide, younger and idealistic, confronted her quietly. Shouldn't we wait for the evidence before drafting the charges? Letitia didn't blink. Sometimes the fire comes before the smoke. He never came back to work. Pam Bondi watched all this from a distance. She saw the press conferences, the righteous fury, the subtle shift in tone. She recognized it because she had danced with it once, but Pam had learned how to burn without turning to ash. Letitia, she feared, had not. Cold and disciplined, Pam logged every move, every quote, every questionable press leak. Her silence wasn't approval, it was preparation. Jim Jordan didn't need preparation. He could smell a political stunt the way a war dog smells gunpowder. He didn't rely on hunches. He trusted patterns. And Letitia's pattern had shifted from law to spectacle. As headlines mounted, so did the friction. Internal DOJ notes flagged procedural concerns. Former colleagues quietly resigned. Still, Letitia pressed forward, a crusader on a mission where evidence played second to narrative. Outside her circle, the damage spread like a crack in glass. Raymond Beckett, a veteran DOJ agent, was quietly dismissed after refusing to reclassify documents that didn't support the new prosecution theory. In his final email, he wrote only, "You're not building a case. You're building a coffin." Eleanor Markey, a retired Catholic schoolteacher, felt the chill more intimately. Her Thursday Rosary Group, 7 elderly women who prayed for unborn children, was visited by 2 suited men from the bureau. She remembered the way one of them stared at her crucifix, not like a relic, but a weapon. When she asked why they were there, he said, "Just making sure no one here's talking politics in disguise." She hadn't felt safe in her own parish since. And then there was Thomas Bradley, a contractor from Virginia, a husband, a father, a registered independent. He stood at a school board meeting to ask why his 12-year-old daughter had been encouraged to role-play as a boy in class. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. Yet 2 weeks later, a federal agent visited his worksite. His name had made a list. He didn't know what kind of list. Only that it ended his contract. These weren't isolated stories. They were warnings wrapped in real lives. Inside Letitia's office, the tension was no longer quiet. Files vanished overnight. Phone calls came from numbers that weren't in any directory. Staff left without exit interviews. One assistant stopped showing up entirely. Another confessed during a panic attack in the break room. We're not upholding the law anymore. We're rewriting it. Still, Letitia told herself it was worth it. He had to pay. She couldn't walk back now. There was too much at stake. Not just her reputation, but her belief that the world owed her something for staying silent all those years. She was overlooked, sidelined, called too loud, too black, too ambitious. But justice doesn't bend for personal redemption, and the fire she lit had begun licking at her own walls. As she sat across from Jim Jordan and Pam Bondi, the courtroom felt like a tomb, airless, unforgiving. She looked at the folder in front of her. Not just a memo, a mirror, and in it she saw every choice, every silence, every push she gave to something she once called justice. The silence in the chamber deepened, and the storm outside began to hum. The folder had teeth. Letitia could feel them even before it opened. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that her undoing wouldn't come from the enemies in front of her. It would come from someone she once trusted. 3 days before the hearing, a flurry of emails leaked to an anonymous journalist. Not speculation, not hearsay. Internal memos, unredacted threads, subject lines that bled intent. The most damning line didn't shout. It whispered, "Find something, anything. We owe it to the campaign." The digital wildfire spread within hours. Twitter blazed with hashtags. Talk shows pivoted mid-script. Even late-night comedians, once allies, turned the leaks into punchlines. On a Wednesday morning, Pam Bondi held a press conference outside the Capitol. She didn't grandstand. She read the emails aloud. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words condemned themselves. Inside Letitia's office, panic hummed through every wall. Junior staffers whispered in hallways. A few packed their desks without asking permission. One assistant left mid-lunch and never returned. Letitia sat behind her desk, staring at the headlines splashed across every screen. Prosecution or political hit. Her phone rang. She didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway. "You lied," the voice said. It was soft, trembling. "Who is this?" "The girl you promised wouldn't be involved." Click. No name, no warning. Just a bruise of regret forming beneath her ribs. That same day, a junior attorney, one of the brightest she'd recruited, walked into her office. Eyes red, hands shaking. "I can't do this," he said. "You asked me to rewrite timelines, to suggest intent where there wasn't any. That's not legal strategy. It's coercion." Letitia tried to soothe him, her voice lower, almost maternal. "You're overthinking. Everyone builds narratives in court." He stepped back like she had struck him. "We're not building a case. We're creating fiction." He left his ID on her desk. By nightfall, his apartment was empty. No forwarding address. Raymond Beckett had watched the chaos from afar. Once buried by the very institution he served, he resurfaced like a storm cloud with a memory. During a quiet interview on a conservative podcast, he dropped the bomb no one saw coming. That case Letitia James revived. "We closed it, fully, years ago. Nothing there but political fumes." The ripple became a wave. Protesters took to the streets, not to defend Trump, but to question the reach of power. Libertarians, moderates, even disenchanted liberals gathered outside government buildings, holding signs that read, "Lawfare is not justice." News anchors who once applauded her pivoted. Networks that crowned her as fearless now questioned her integrity. One anchor sighed live on air. If she planned the prosecution before the evidence, what else did she pre-write? Letitia's allies grew silent. Invitations to speak at legal panels vanished. A university cancelled her upcoming lecture without explanation. She walked into a staff meeting to find half the chairs empty. The nights turned longer. Her bedroom, once a sanctuary, felt like a courtroom with no exit. She tossed in silk sheets that no longer comforted her. Her mind played old recordings, campaign speeches, courtroom declarations. Every time she swore, it was about justice. Then came the call she didn't expect. "It's me." The voice belonged to her old mentor, a retired judge, a woman who had guided her through her earliest cases. She had once called Letitia her legal daughter. "I watched your speech," the woman said. "This isn't the justice we dreamed of." Letitia tried to laugh it off. "You know how politics is, messy." But the judge didn't flinch. "It's not messy, it's hollow, and you know it." That night, Letitia stood in her bathroom, facing herself. The lights above the mirror flickered, as if refusing to fully illuminate her face. Her lipstick quivered in her hand. She lifted it, paused, then set it down. Behind her reflection was a woman who didn't blink. A woman who had once believed her ambition was righteous. Now she wasn't sure if anything she'd done had ever truly been about justice, or if it was always about proving she mattered. Her phone buzzed. A text, no name. "You still have time to stop this." She stared at it, unsure if it was a threat, a warning, or a plea. Outside, the wind howled against the windows like a verdict no. One had spoken yet. Inside, the truth waited like a gavel raised above a guilty man's head, ready to fall. Letitia's hands were still, but her mind raced like a runaway train, skidding toward a cliff. The room was too quiet, too heavy, as if holding its breath. She could feel the glares like needles in her skin. Yet it wasn't the press, or even the committee that unnerved her. It was Pam, unflinching, unreadable, holding a manila folder in her hand as if it contained the fate of nations. Pam Bondi stepped forward with the confidence of a woman who had waited long enough. Her voice, controlled yet sharp, sliced through the air. "Letitia James," she began. "On May 11th, 2020, you received this email from a political donor, one who later funneled over $500,000 into your affiliated PACI. The message suggested that prosecution efforts align strategically with campaign milestones for maximum media impact." She turned the folder toward the panel, exposing the printout. "Redacted for privacy, but unmistakably damning. Did you comply?" Pam asked. "Because the timeline matches perfectly." Letitia remained silent. Her face didn't twitch this time, but her left hand, hidden beneath the table, clenched until her nails broke skin. Jim Jordan followed like a prosecutor who'd already won the case. Without ceremony, he triggered a projector. The screen behind Letitia lit up. Photos, expense, reports, travel summaries, a taxpayer-funded coordination retreat in Aruba, a spa receipt signed in her own name, hotel bookings for her chief counsel, who, it turned out, shared more than professional proximity. Pam didn't gloat. She leaned forward slightly, her voice quieter now, more surgical. Was it prosecution, or was it a vacation? Because the receipts suggest both. Letitia inhaled sharply, as if she'd been struck. Before she could speak, the next witness was called. "Eleanor Markey," Jordan announced. "Please take the stand." The room shifted. Even the press lowered their cameras out of respect. Eleanor moved slowly, hands trembling, not from fear, but from disbelief that she'd been summoned here at all. Her voice was gentle, worn by age but sharpened by memory. We were praying the rosary, she began, tears pooling in her eyes. That's all we do on Thursdays. We pray for unborn children, for peace. And then the agents came in, said they were with the Bureau. One of them asked if we supported Trump. Another asked if any of us had donated to pro-life groups. Gasps didn't come, but silence thundered in their place. Letitia shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, her expression cracked, just slightly. Her mask of resolve now a pane of glass, warping under heat. Jordan leaned in, radicalized by prayer. That's what they called it. Letitia stood abruptly, her voice rising. Oh, please. This is a witch hunt dressed in legalese. Pam has wanted my career on a stick since the day I walked into this office. This isn't about justice. It's personal. Pam didn't even blink. No, she said flatly, it's principle. And you abandoned it the moment you turned due process into political theatre. Letitia's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The final name echoed in the room like the toll of a bell. Thomas Bradley, please take the witness chair. He looked nothing like a revolutionary. A father, a contractor, his suit too stiff, his tie borrowed. But his voice carried the weight of every silenced parent across the country. All I asked, he began, his jaw clenched to keep the pain from spilling, was why my daughter was being taught to role-play as a different gender. I didn't threaten. I didn't yell. 2 weeks later, a federal agent showed up at my job. Said I'd been flagged. He turned not to the panel, but to Letitia. You built a list. And I ended up on it. For asking a question. Jim Jordan, his tone colder than steel, closed the session with a sentence that landed like a sledgehammer. This is what lawfare looks like when it loses its soul. Letitia didn't argue. Couldn't. Her silence spoke volumes, and none of it in her defense. The hearing room, once bursting with noise, descended into stillness once more. Not the calm of peace, but the pause before the next blow. The vote wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It came swiftly, like a judgment that had been decided long before it was spoken aloud. 98%. The chamber echoed with the tally. But Letitia barely heard it. Her ears rang with something deeper, something final. She stood as they stripped her credentials, the badge that once commanded headlines, now resting in the palm of a clerk who avoided her eyes. Her chair was empty before the gavel struck. By the time she exited the building, her name had already been replaced in the official directories. Reporters no longer shouted her title, only questions she couldn't answer. She didn't stop for them, not out of pride, but because if she did, she feared she might collapse in the street. Fonnie Willis, once her confidant in righteous warfare, didn't call. She couldn't. She had her own hearing notice taped to her office door less than an hour later. The subpoenas spread like wildfire through the justice corridors, one domino striking the next. Offices that once operated with impunity now scrambled for cover, their walls no longer safe from the reckoning they helped build. Letitia stepped into her apartment just past midnight. It felt smaller, colder, like someone had rearranged the air in her absence. Her heels echoed as she walked through the kitchen. No voice greeted her. No calls lit up her phone. Her inbox was filled with statements from colleagues distancing themselves. A press release from her alma mater rescinded an honorary award. A former ally's tweet simply read, "We believed in her. We were wrong." She sank onto the couch, turned on the television, and there it was. Her own face in the corner of the screen, frozen beneath the words, Disgraced prosecutor suspended pending investigation. The host didn't bother with nuance. The panelists didn't wait for facts. They tore through her career like vultures on the last piece of meat. She watched until the commentary became static, her eyes glassy, her breath shallow. She opened. Her drawer pulled out a notepad and began writing. "You warned me," the letter began. "But I thought history would forgive the means if the ends felt noble. I was wrong. I crossed a line I can't uncross, and I've dragged others over it with me." She folded the note. Not to send, just to admit it. Outside, the streets had calmed. Where there had once been outrage, now there was stillness. Church groups returned to their circles, holding hands tighter than before. Parents reclaimed their seats at school board meetings, no longer afraid to ask the questions that once got them flagged. There were no celebrations, just quiet exhalations, as if justice, bruised and battered, had finally taken a breath. Inside the walls of power, something shifted. A reminder that oversight wasn't a threat. It was a duty, and when that duty is hijacked by ego, the system remembers. Slowly, painfully, it begins to heal. Letitia didn't cry that night. She didn't scream or break glasses. She sat still, staring at her reflection in the black TV screen, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't see a warrior. She saw a warning. The vote wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It came swiftly, like a judgment that had been decided long before it was spoken aloud. 98%. The chamber echoed with the tally. But Letitia barely heard it. Her ears rang with something deeper, something final. She stood as they stripped her credentials, the badge that once commanded headlines, now resting in the palm of a clerk who avoided her eyes. Her chair was empty before the gavel struck. By the time she exited the building, her name had already been replaced in the official directories. Reporters no longer shouted her title, only questions she couldn't answer. She didn't stop for them, not out of pride, but because if she did, she feared she might collapse in the street. Fonnie Willis, once her confidant in righteous warfare, didn't call. She couldn't. She had her own hearing notice taped to her office door less than an hour later. The subpoenas spread like wildfire through the justice corridors, one domino striking the next. Offices that once operated with impunity now scrambled for cover, their walls no longer safe from the reckoning they helped build. Letitia stepped into her apartment just past midnight. It felt smaller, colder, like someone had rearranged the air in her absence. Her heels echoed as she walked through the kitchen. No voice greeted her. No calls lit up her phone. Her inbox was filled with statements from colleagues distancing themselves. A press release from her alma mater rescinded an honorary award. A former ally's tweet simply read, "We believed in her. We were wrong." She sank onto the couch, turned on the television, and there it was. Her own face in the corner of the screen, frozen beneath the words, "Disgraced prosecutor suspended pending investigation." The host didn't bother with nuance. The panelists didn't wait for facts. They tore through her career like vultures on the last piece of meat. She watched until the commentary became static, her eyes glassy, her breath shallow. She opened. Her drawer pulled out a notepad and began writing. "You warned me," the letter began. "But I thought history would forgive the means if the ends felt noble. I was wrong. I crossed a line I can't uncross, and I've dragged others over it with me." She folded the note. Not to send, just to admit it. Outside, the streets had calmed. Where there had once been outrage, now There was stillness. Church groups returned to their circles, holding hands tighter than before. Parents reclaimed their seats at school board meetings, no longer afraid to ask the questions that once got them flagged. There were no celebrations, just quiet exhalations, as if justice, bruised and battered, had finally taken a breath. Inside the walls of power, something shifted. A reminder that oversight wasn't a threat. It was a duty. And when that duty is hijacked by ego, the system remembers. Slowly, painfully, it begins to heal. Letitia didn't cry that night. She didn't scream or break glasses. She sat still, staring at her reflection in the black TV screen. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't see a warrior. She saw a warning,